Welcome to Ancient Forbidden Knowledge. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode, we unravel a hidden current of belief that stretches across empires, religions, and centuries, yet remains invisible to most. Behind the veils of modern worship and cultural symbols lies a darker, older allegiance, one not to a god of love or light, but to a shadowed force associated with time, judgment, and binding control. From black cubes to rings, from ancient Rome to modern finance, the fingerprints are everywhere. But who or what is truly being worshipped? And why is the name Saturn always just beneath the surface? In the ancient world, few deities wielded as much enigmatic power as Saturn. To the Romans, he was a god of time, wealth, and harvest, often associated with cycles of death and rebirth. Yet long before the Roman pantheon took form, older civilizations whispered of a celestial force that ruled the distant past, one remembered with awe and fear. In the Mesopotamian pantheon, the figure of Ninurta shares Saturn's attributes, wielding control over agriculture, storms, and the law of the gods. In Carthage, Saturn was identified with Baal-Hamon, a god to whom children were reportedly sacrificed by fire. Even in Canaan, the echoes of this dark veneration surface in the worship of Moloch, another name linked with burning offerings and terrible devotion. These early associations reveal a pattern. Saturn was not merely a deity of grain and order, but one deeply tied to restriction, punishment, and control. The Greeks called him Kronos, the devourer of his own children, representing time that consumes all. He ruled during the mythic Golden Age, a time of peace, before being overthrown by his son Zeus. But that peace came with a price. Kronos' reign was defined by fear and subjugation, not freedom. His eventual exile did not erase him, it merely pushed his influence into the shadows. Saturn's symbolism became layered with meaning. The sickle or scythe, originally a tool of harvest, became a tool of death. The cube, representing order and structure, became a prison. The colour black, once a symbol of the fertile earth, transformed into an emblem of secrecy, void, and control. As empires evolved and religions rose and fell, these symbols remained, often repurposed but never erased. In Rome, Saturn was honoured during the festival of Saturnalia, a chaotic celebration where social roles were reversed and laws temporarily suspended. Slaves feasted like kings, gambling was permitted, masters served servants. On the surface it was a joyous rebellion, but beneath it was a coded message: Saturn rules by inversion, order through chaos, bondage beneath revelry, and when the festival ended, the hierarchy snapped back into place, stronger than before. Temples to Saturn were always built in places of authority. In Rome, the Temple of Saturn stood at the foot of the Capitoline Hill, its columns still standing today. Behind its walls, the Roman treasury was stored. Saturn not only governed time and harvest, but the wealth of an empire. Even the word capital may trace back to this hill, where Saturn's legacy in finance began. Through conquest and colonization, the cult of Saturn did not vanish. It evolved. Its symbols dispersed, its rituals were obscured by new dogmas, yet the core remained untouched. Saturn was never eliminated, only hidden, renamed and ritualized under different banners. And the places he once ruled still carry his mark, even if his name has been forgotten. In the late 19th century, a series of discoveries in the ruins of North Africa and the Levant uncovered altars bearing inscriptions dedicated to deities long thought lost to time. Among them were dedications to Baal-Hamon, a figure scholars quickly identified as a regional form of Saturn. These sites, especially around Carthage, revealed rows of stone stelae and urns containing the charred remains of infants and small animals. While historians debated the purpose, some labelling it as symbolic cremation, others pointed to the consistency of the findings, the deliberate design of the altars, and the inscriptions linking these offerings to divine favour. The cult of Saturn, it seemed, had once demanded blood. In the 20th century, a suppressed report from a joint French-Tunisian excavation noted an unmarked burial pit behind one of these temples, containing what appeared to be ceremonial tools, scorched ash layers, and a black cube carved from a dense stone not native to the region. The report never saw official publication. It was shelved and the dig was quietly halted. Years later, photographs of the cube surfaced briefly online before disappearing entirely. The artifact's purpose was never officially stated, but researchers familiar with Saturnian iconography recognized it immediately. The black cube is one of the most enduring and controversial symbols in esoteric tradition, representing time, limitation, and control. This symbol did not vanish with Carthage, it reappeared again and again in places of power. In Mecca, the Kaaba stands at the center of Islamic pilgrimage. Though Islam has no official link to Saturn, the geometric shape, color, and circumambulatory ritual around the cube parallel older Saturnian rites. In Judaism, the tefillin, small black boxes bound to the arm and forehead, mirror the cube's sacred geometry. In Christian tradition, cathedrals are often constructed with a black cornerstone, placed ceremonially at the base of the structure. In the modern world, black cube sculptures have been quietly erected in financial and political centres: New York, Melbourne, Santa Ana, Copenhagen. Their purpose is never clearly explained, described only as public art or minimalist monuments. But those who understand the deeper layers of symbolism see something else. These installations do not honour a specific event or ideology. They represent something older, something still being worshipped. The secrecy surrounding these cubes, and the way they appear in institutions of influence, from banks to government buildings, suggests that Saturnian veneration has not been abandoned, but absorbed into the architecture of modern control. It no longer wears the name of Saturn, Baal, or Kronos, but its essence endures. Worship hidden in plain sight, draped in abstraction, yet drawn from the same source, a source that once demanded obedience, ritual, and sacrifice, and may still. While mainstream historians frame the legacy of Saturn as purely mythological, the physical and symbolic residue left behind tells a more unsettling story. The black cube, though publicly dismissed as artistic minimalism or religious abstraction, consistently appears in locations associated with control, wealth, and authority. Its presence is not limited to ancient ruins or religious shrines. In the heart of global finance, in cities governed by structured law and corporate power, the same icon persists, silent, unacknowledged, and almost always unexplained. In New York City, a large black cube sculpture sits outside the United Nations Plaza, often referred to only by its title, New York Cube. Another appears in downtown Santa Ana, positioned near civic buildings. Melbourne hosts a similar monolith in its financial district. These modern cubes bear no inscriptions, no dedications, no obvious affiliations, yet their uniform design, geometric perfection, and strategic placement echo the sacred geometry found in Saturnian rituals. They stand not as monuments to progress, but as relics of a belief system that never died. Photographs taken within several major banking headquarters show cube-like installations in their lobbies, behind reception desks, or embedded into floor mosaics. The symbolism is often dismissed as architectural flourish or corporate branding, but within Saturnian doctrine, the cube is far more than decor. It is a metaphysical cage, representing matter, limitation, and time itself. Saturn, known as the god of time, rules through these constraints. He governs the contract, the debt, the calendar. His domain is order, born of submission. In Saturn's traditional astrological role, he is the keeper of rules and structures. This archetype has quietly merged with the mechanisms of global governance. Laws, taxes, debt systems, and bureaucratic hierarchies all reflect his influence, subtle but omnipresent. In legal language, the phrase Saturnine influence is still used to describe stern rulings or judgments rooted in old precedent. This is not coincidence, it is continuity. Digital culture has adopted the black cube in new forms. Virtual reality headsets, gaming consoles, and even operating systems have used cube motifs in branding or design. When viewed through a Saturnian lens, these devices act as literal black boxes, containing worlds within worlds, pulling users into constructed realities governed by invisible rules. Just as Saturn represents confinement within time and form, so too do these technologies create immersive cages of code and perception. It is in these layers of modern life, architecture, technology, finance, and law that Saturn's presence is most fully realized. The symbols are not hidden. They are visible in the open, but their meaning has been obscured through repetition, normalization, and abstraction. The black cube, once a sacred object of worship, has become the unspoken totem of a world shaped by the same principles it once enforced through ritual. The question is no longer whether Saturn is still worshipped. It is how deeply that worship has been built into the foundations of the systems we accept as normal. The recurrence of Saturnian symbolism across unrelated cultures suggests something far more than coincidence. Ancient Mesopotamians worshipped Ninurta, a god of law, discipline and control, traits later associated with Saturn. In the Greek tradition, Kronos ruled with similar severity, devouring his children to maintain power. The Romans preserved his mythology but formalized his worship in Saturnalia, a ritual inversion of order cloaked in celebration. Far from isolated myths, these archetypes echo one another across time, carrying with them the same themes: sacrifice, cycles, bondage, and hidden dominion. In Hindu cosmology, the planet Saturn is known as Shani, a god associated with karma, time, and punishment. Shani is slow-moving, cold, and stern, described in sacred texts as one who brings suffering to correct moral failings. In ritual practice, Shani is feared more than honored. Offerings are made to appease him, not to invoke blessings. Statues of Shani often show him as dark-skinned, dressed in black, mounted on a crow or vulture, symbols of death, time, and surveillance. These traits closely mirror Saturn's role in Western astrology, where he is known as the Great Malefic, a planet of restriction, delay, and consequence. The Dogon people of Mali have long been known for their extraordinary astronomical knowledge, particularly of the star system Sirius. But within their cosmology, a figure known as Lebe plays a curious role, a god of death, time, and agriculture, who is symbolically buried and reborn. Though outwardly different, Lebe's essence parallels Saturn's: death as a portal to rebirth, the harvest as both sustenance and sacrifice, time as a force to be endured rather than embraced. Even the rituals surrounding Lebe contain references to geometric shapes and sacred numbers long associated with Saturnian worship. Mesoamerican traditions, too, hint at this archetype. The god Tezcatlica of the Aztecs was a deity of judgment, conflict, and night, known for wielding power through deception and reversal. Rituals in his name often involved human sacrifice, mirrors, and serpentine imagery. Though not a direct Saturn counterpart, his attributes align disturbingly well. He ruled by illusion, controlled through fear, and demanded blood to maintain balance. The deeper one looks, the clearer the pattern becomes, a single archetype, expressed in different tongues, beneath different banners. In Egyptian theology, the god Set, who murdered Osiris and ruled the desert and storms, is another echo. He represents chaos, division, and isolated power. Set was both feared and necessary, the counterbalance to cosmic order. Some esoteric scholars argue that over centuries, Set's role merged into hidden Saturnian cults, particularly through Greco-Roman syncretism. His association with deserts, silence, and harshness resonates with Saturn's dominion over cold, distance, and discipline. Even in Norse mythology, the figure of Ymir, the primordial being whose body was used to build the world, reflects the Saturnian motif of sacrifice for creation. Odin, the god who replaces this cosmic progenitor, embodies wisdom through pain and rules with strict order. Here too, creation comes through loss and authority through suffering. These are not scattered fragments. They are recurring nodes in a global web of hidden worship. From the icy rings of Saturn above to the black cubes placed below, the same principles govern myth and structure alike. Each culture, while seemingly independent, draws from a reservoir of symbolic knowledge that predates written history. Whether born of shared memory, ancestral contact, or something more unexplainable, the cult of Saturn has left its mark everywhere, encoded in names, rituals, and shapes that endure, not in the open, but just beneath the surface. Despite the global recurrence of Saturnian motifs, institutional voices remain curiously silent. Academia, while willing to study planetary deities and cultural mythologies in isolated terms, refuses to acknowledge the consistent patterns that bind them together. When similarities are too great to ignore, they are attributed to coincidence or archetypal projection. This refusal is not rooted in evidence, but in the need to protect an intellectual structure built on linear history and compartmentalized interpretation. The academic firewall surrounding the cult of Saturn is not accidental. It is foundational. When scholars encounter the black cube in religious, architectural, or cultural settings, They treat each instance as symbolic only within its native context. They will explain the Kaaba as a pre-Islamic sanctuary absorbed into Islamic practice. The Jewish tefillin are taught as objects of prayer tradition, with little inquiry into their geometric and esoteric implications. Modern art installations resembling Saturnian symbols are interpreted solely as aesthetic choices. In each case, the underlying assumption is that there is no deeper continuity, no shared lineage. But this assumption is precisely what safeguards consensus history from collapse. Textbooks rarely mention the darker aspects of Saturn worship. The child sacrifices to Baal Hammon are often explained away as exaggerated enemy propaganda, despite archaeological evidence supporting the claims. The annual ritual inversion of Saturnalia is dismissed as a festive anomaly, not a coded cultural message. And the ancient records that link Saturn with binding laws, financial control, and the architecture of power are scattered across disconnected disciplines, preventing synthesis. Each puzzle piece is studied alone, never in relation to the whole. Funding mechanisms enforce this division. Research grants are seldom awarded to those pursuing comparative studies across ancient religions, occult practices, and astrotheological frameworks. Universities often discourage dissertations that lean into esotericism, no matter how well sourced. Professors who deviate too far from accepted interpretations risk professional exile. The result is not an absence of data, but a refusal to connect it. The occult roots of Saturnian worship, particularly its ties to sacrifice, inversion, and societal control, remain taboo. The few who dare explore these connections, whether in anthropology, archaeology, or religious studies, are quickly labelled fringe or conspiratorial. This classification becomes a form of intellectual quarantine, isolating inconvenient truths in order to protect the broader narrative. Even when symbolic alignments emerge in law, government, and architecture, such as black-robed judges presiding over courtrooms constructed with geometric symbolism, or national seals featuring planetary motifs, academia insists on secular explanations. The idea that ancient metaphysical systems could have survived, evolved, and embedded themselves into modern institutions is too disruptive to entertain. And yet the symbols persist. The architecture stands. The rituals repeat. The resistance to inquiry does not disprove the presence of something ancient. It confirms that its implications are too dangerous for open discourse. In a world where knowledge is managed and meaning is controlled, silence is not absence. It is protection. Not for the public, but for the story told to keep power intact. Beyond the limits of sanctioned discourse lie theories that challenge the very structure of known history. These theories are not built on fantasy, but on patterns. Patterns so persistent and specific that they defy coincidence. One such theory proposes that the cult of Saturn was never a religion in the traditional sense, but a system of control designed and maintained by a technologically advanced civilization far older than recorded history suggests. These beings, whether extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or simply pre-human, are said to have established Saturn not just as a planet but as a symbol, an anchor for systems of time, law, sacrifice, and surveillance. Some researchers claim that Saturn once held a central position in our sky, far more prominent than it appears today. This theory, often called the Saturn hypothesis, argues that in a different cosmic configuration, possibly before a cataclysmic event, Saturn loomed large above the Earth, visible in daylight, encircled by brilliant rings and electrical discharges. Ancient texts and petroglyphs from disparate cultures seem to depict a similar celestial object, a dark sphere surrounded by luminous wings, tridents, or radiant spokes. These motifs appear in Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Mesoamerican art, often associated with gods of judgment and creation. If true, this would explain the near-universal reverence for Saturn and the ring symbolism found in religious iconography, sacred geometry, and royal regalia. The crown, the halo, and even the wedding ring may be inherited echoes of Saturn's once majestic form. The shift from worshipping the sun to venerating Saturn would mark not a theological evolution, but a memory of cosmic upheaval, when the dominant force in the sky changed, and with it, the gods themselves. Other theorists suggest that the black cube represents a containment device, an energetic or metaphysical structure used to trap consciousness or broadcast control. In this view, the cult of Saturn is not just symbolic, but active. The rituals, symbols, and geometric structures attributed to Saturn are seen as components of a planetary-scale grid, an invisible matrix designed to harness psychic energy, suppress spiritual awakening, or maintain a simulated reality. The cube, rather than being a mere metaphor for order, becomes a literal cage for the human soul. This view is reinforced by the cube's presence in high-tech contexts. Devices we carry, screens we stare into, even the shape of data centers and memory modules all reflect a grid-like architecture. The interface between human consciousness and machine intelligence increasingly resembles a system of boxes within boxes, rules within rules. The more connected we become, the more confined we feel. Time, once a measure of life's rhythm, now serves as a tool of anxiety and debt. Law, once a means of order, has become a labyrinth. In each domain, Saturn's fingerprints are visible, structuring, binding, enclosing. These theories are speculative, but they gain credibility from their coherence. They explain the persistence of Saturn's symbols, the suppression of inquiry, and the subtle sense that something ancient still governs our perception. Whether literal or energetic, whether born of lost civilizations or hidden intelligences, the cult of Saturn offers a framework through which modern systems of power begin to make disturbing sense. Not as accidents of progress, but as designs inherited from a forgotten order, one that still watches, still guides, and perhaps still demands sacrifice. If the cult of Saturn truly persists in the architecture of global systems, then it is not a relic of the past. It is an operational design, executed with precision and protected by silence. In this model, the world we inhabit functions less as an open society and more as a controlled environment shaped by ancient mechanisms of obedience, fear, and inversion. The question is not simply who believes in Saturn today, but who benefits from the belief being hidden. Throughout history, the consolidation of power has always required the manipulation of narrative. In ancient Rome, Saturn's domain was the treasury, the calendar, and the law. These were not abstract associations, they were tools of control. Whoever administered the calendar controlled the rituals, the taxation, and the psychological structure of the year. Whoever enforced the law decided what behavior aligned with the divine. And whoever managed the treasury dictated the flow of resources, the rise and fall of families, and the survival of entire populations. These structures have not changed, they have only been modernized. Today, central banks act as the high priests of financial control, issuing currency, setting interest rates, and maintaining debt structures that bind billions to a clockwork of economic servitude. Legal systems, layered in arcane language and ritual, maintain hierarchies that reward allegiance and punish deviation. Time itself, down to the last second, is tracked and regulated globally, with calendars and fiscal years dictating every aspect of public and private life. In all these systems, the influence of Saturn is not symbolic, it is systemic. In occult traditions, Saturn is associated with restriction, binding, and the gateway to the unseen. The planetary sigil of Saturn resembles a scythe or sickle, and in astrology, Saturn is the enforcer of karma, structure, and boundaries. Those who align themselves with Saturnian power are believed to gain mastery over these domains: time, wealth, law, death. Secret societies, esoteric orders, and elite bloodlines have long been accused of Saturnian allegiance. Their symbols, checkerboard floors, black robes, twin pillars, and labyrinthine structures mirror the attributes of Saturnian geometry. These are not arbitrary design choices. They are declarations of allegiance. Consider the recurring use of inversion, a hallmark of Saturnian worship. In Saturnalia, masters served slaves. In Moloch rituals, the child was offered to fire instead of being protected. In modern culture, truth is often mocked, virtue corrupted, and suffering normalized. In entertainment, the villain is glorified, the sacred desecrated, the profane celebrated. In these inversions, one finds echoes of Saturn, the god who consumed his own children, who ruled through reversal, who demanded sacrifice disguised as celebration. The elite benefit not merely by wealth, but by maintaining humanity in a state of spiritual blindness. If Saturn represents the limitations of time, law, and form, then those who worship Saturn master those limitations while imposing them on others. The general population remains unaware, participating in rituals they do not recognize, obeying rules they did not write, and suffering consequences from systems they were never meant to understand. The more hidden the worship, the more effective its control. It does not require belief from the masses, only participation. And as long as the symbols remain unrecognized, the structure remains intact. The cube, the calendar, the contract, the courtroom, all become sanctified ground. Not through faith, but through repetition. This is the true power of the Saturnian order. It does not ask for prayers, it requires obedience, it rewards silence, and it punishes awakening. If even a fraction of the Saturnian framework is true, then the implications stretch far beyond ancient theology or esoteric architecture. They challenge our very model of consciousness, identity, and free will. Saturn, in nearly every ancient tradition, represents not only time and law but also limitation, the invisible fence around perception. If humanity has been shaped, not just physically but spiritually, by this archetype, then it is possible we have been conditioned for millennia to see only within the boundaries it allows. In astrological lore, Saturn is referred to as the great teacher, but also as the great inhibitor. He brings lessons, but always through hardship. In this duality lies the paradox. Suffering becomes the path to wisdom, while comfort breeds ignorance. This framing serves not only a metaphysical purpose, it echoes the justification of control. The suffering enforced by laws, systems, and scarcity is framed as necessary, even sacred. Those in power claim that order requires sacrifice, discipline demands obedience, and wisdom is only earned through pain. But who defines the pain and who reaps the benefit? Many of the world's most rigid social structures are modelled on this idea. Education systems reward memorization over insight. Religious institutions preach submission to divine authority without questioning the nature of that authority. Economic systems praise productivity while demanding endless consumption of time and energy. The structures of Saturn are designed to loop endlessly. Debt cycles, prison sentences, generational poverty, ritual calendars. The wheel turns, but never breaks. In mystical traditions, Saturn's rings are not just physical, they represent a barrier between the material and the divine. The ancient symbol of the Ouroboros, a serpent eating its own tail, represents this same loop, this containment of spirit within form. If the cult of Saturn is truly active, then its deepest function may be metaphysical, to keep the soul bound to repetition, denying it access to higher realms or liberated states of awareness. Some have speculated that Saturn's frequency, its literal electromagnetic signature, plays a role in this binding. NASA's Cassini mission revealed that Saturn emits powerful radio waves, which some researchers suggest could influence human consciousness in ways we do not yet understand. Myth and science intersect here, as the ancient voice of the god becomes perhaps a measurable broadcast. Are we hearing echoes of an ancient intelligence, or feeling the effect of a planetary mechanism still in operation? If Saturnian control extends into the energetic or dimensional layers of reality, then escaping its grasp is not just a matter of political rebellion or spiritual awakening. It requires an unraveling of the entire psychic infrastructure we have come to accept as normal. It asks whether the very concept of linear time, of suffering as virtue, of authority as sacred, are constructs born not from truth, but from containment. And if that is the case, then liberation begins not with new systems, but with memory. The memory of what came before the binding, the recognition that time, law, and death were not always gods, that once perhaps humanity lived outside the cube, beyond the rings, unshackled by fear before the cult took hold. And the deepest implication of all, that what has been worshipped as divine order may in fact be the oldest prison. All throughout history, civilizations have revered Saturn as a god of boundaries, of structure, of finality. Yet when the layers of symbolism, architecture, ritual, and power are peeled back, a darker truth begins to emerge, one that shifts Saturn from a cosmic teacher into something more complex, more intrusive, and more insidious. The evidence, scattered yet persistent, suggests that this worship was never about reverence. It was about alignment. Alignment with a force that governs through fear, binds through ritual, and endures through secrecy. Whether Saturn was once a visible god in the sky or a planetary intelligence revered across cultures, its influence remains embedded in our world, not in temples or prayers, but in the systems we serve and the time we obey. The cube, the ring, the scythe, these are not relics. They are living glyphs of a belief system that never died. It only changed form. It embedded itself in financial systems, legal codes, technological design, and the very architecture of authority. We live in a reality where most of the population unknowingly participates in rituals of limitation. We measure our lives in Saturnian time, seconds, minutes, hours, days. We sign contracts, follow rules, and operate within structures that reward conformity and punish deviation. We build our identities around titles, roles, and hierarchies that echo the strict laws of Saturn's domain. And most of us never question where these ideas came from or what they serve. But some have begun to see the seams, to question the purpose of endless productivity, the glorification of struggle, the silence around ancient knowledge. The resurgence of interest in forgotten symbols, forbidden history, and metaphysical inquiry may not be coincidence. It may be memory. Memory reawakening in a time when the old structures begin to crack. When the invisible control grid, masked as modern civilization, begins to reveal its original face. The cult of Saturn, if real, was never meant to be noticed. It was designed to be lived, but once seen, it cannot be unseen. And once remembered, it becomes a choice. A choice to continue moving in circles or to step outside the ring. A choice to remain bound or to reclaim what was lost before the cube was placed around us. Thanks for listening. This has been Ancient Forbidden Knowledge. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to unlock full video versions of all our podcasts, plus exclusive documentaries, bonus content, and more, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Just $5 a month gets you everything. Patreon.com/The Forbidden Knowledge Network. Subscribe now.